Hello and welcome to a virtual town hall discussing the Stay Home, Stay Safe order Buncombe County issued on March the 26th of this year in response to the COVID-19 crisis. At this time, more than any in previous history, we are coordinating closely between our business community and our governmental community to understand how we can see ourselves as a community through this particular public health crisis. I want to thank Tim Love from Buncombe County for joining us for this virtual town hall. Tim is Director of Intergovernmental Relations and has also been working around the clock with the Buncombe County Emergency Operations Center. Tim, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Clark. Glad to be here and glad to share any information I can on the Stay Home, Stay Safe order.
And finally, my name is Clark Duncan. I'm Senior Vice President for Economic Development at the Asheville Chamber. Thank you to those who have dialed in to watch. I hope you find this helpful. With that, we'll jump into the presentation. Tim, I think a good place to start would just be explaining to the audience how we ended up here, the purpose and the background of the Stay Home, Stay Safe order.
Sure, Clark, thanks. This week we issued local supplemental guidance, and as you can see on the screen, there's a website where you can access that information. And a key point that I want to make sure everyone out there understands is, we didn't come to this determination lightly. This process has been done in consultation with the different levels of government at the federal and state level, but also in collaboration with other local governments in North Carolina. So the Stay Home, Stay Safe order, it's very comparable to what we've seen in other states, but is also nearly identical to similar orders in Guilford and Mecklenburg County. Key to recognize here is that, when we issued this order, it was a data-driven policy. And I just want people to understand that this wasn't frivolous. We weren't loosely deciding when and where to do this. As we analyzed the data locally of our COVID-19 cases, we view from a public health standpoint that there's a window, a 2-week window, from roughly March 26th to April 9th, where if we take a decisive, community-focused action, we can really flatten the curve. And so we've taken those efforts and thus put out the policy. A key for folks to understand is that, we've got something like 15 cases locally, and those are just confirmed cases. We believe that there's additional cases out there that aren't confirmed. And so super important for us to take these actions now so that we limit the spread for those that may not even realize that they have it. So that's the reasoning behind the policy. Know that it is data-driven. On the screen, you can see there's a declaration, which is a formal document, legal in nature, as well as a supplemental guidance document. And the latter is in more common speak and meant to be easier for folks to digest, but just wanted to share that. Finally, effective dates, again, starting March 26th through at 8 p.m., which was yesterday, Thursday, and proceeding through April 9th at 6 a.m. It's a 2-week period. I'd also like to state that this is shorter than what we've seen in some of our partner organizations. Mecklenburg, as an example, has a 3-week Stay Home, Stay Safe policy. And we'll review the data moving forward, and we'll issue additional guidance as necessary.
Thanks, Tim. I think it's really helpful to understand that the actions we're taking today in both our personal lives and our businesses will have the desired impact, and it's based on the data projections of your public health team. So thank you for sharing that. The next slide is a little bit of a softball. I also want to make sure that our audience understands that a stay home, stay safe order is very different from a shelter-in-place order. There's a number of essential activities that are permitted and encouraged by residents. Could you talk about that?
Absolutely. So, when you issue an order like this, it creates a lot of concern in the community, and rightfully. But, a proper stay-at-home order would say that you would not be able to leave your house for any circumstances unless they're emergency in nature. That is not what we're doing here. And, on the screen, you can see that there's a number of personal activities considered essential. And so these are things that we're saying as a Buncombe County resident, you are able to do. And so just to touch on a few, for health and safety, if you have a doctor's appointment, you are allowed to leave your house to attend that appointment. If you need to pick up prescriptions, of course, do that. That is essential. If you are just looking to get out of the house and get some exercise, go on a hike, ride a bike, go for a run, of course, do that as long as you're complying with social distancing requirements. Additionally, and this is a big focus for us, if you're assisting others to bring them supplies or care for a loved one, of course do that, but please limit sort of non-essential. Just visiting to say hello is different than dropping off groceries for someone who can't. Final bucket, which translates or takes us to the next slide, is if you have work that is deemed essential, of course we would advise you to continue to go to work. And in the next slides, we can talk about what those essential business functions are.
Thanks for the segue, Tim. That's clearly where here at the Chamber and the Economic Development Coalition, and I know on your hotline, you're getting lots of questions. So let's see if we can help make more clear some of the guidelines that have been offered to business. So on the screen in front of us now are a number of business activities that are considered essential and permissible under this policy. Could you walk us through those?
Absolutely. So this list here, essential, these are top level buckets. So within the guidance document, the declaration, as well as the interpretive guidance, there's lots of examples for each of these bullets, but I'll provide a little commentary on some of them. So healthcare operations are considered essential. Those would include urgent cares, hospitals, pharmacies, but does not include, for instance, gymnasiums or other places to go exercise for indoor purposes. Government functions are considered essential, so think of your ambulances, your 911 dispatch centers, et cetera. Critical infrastructure, here we're talking about utilities, water, sewer, as well as energy. Could also include road maintenance, highway maintenance. Essential retail is an important bucket that we'll spend some time on today, but think of grocery stores as an example, hardware stores. Our educational institutions, fairly straightforward. I would clarify they are required to exercise stay home, stay safe policies at institutions, so most are virtual. Providers of basic necessities for the economically disadvantaged. So, our nonprofit community that is supporting so many in this community, they fall into this category. The essential services to maintain essential operations of residences and essential businesses. So these are the support services that make sure that our buildings and our homes still operate. So, think of those that are cleaning and disinfecting businesses, or think of the folks that are fixing plumbing or electricity within our homes. The news media and childcare are self-explanatory. And then the final bucket is businesses are allowed to maintain minimum basic operations. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but the spirit of this is, we recognize that many businesses can't just shut down overnight and not turn up again for another 2 weeks. And so as we move forward, we'll talk through that.
Thanks, Tim. I think we recognize the great challenge that many of our Buncombe County businesses will be considered essential and will continue to thrive. Others may not fall into these buckets. So I want to walk us through some of these more complex definitions to help our audience understand some that may be less clear on first reading. So let's dive into section 3, which is talking about essential infrastructure. As defined by national standard, and I appreciate the county leaning on, for example, the National Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Agency to determine what these buckets are that are essential not only to Buncombe County, but sort of national continuity in the economy. Could you talk through these and how these were selected?
Absolutely. So, we did lean on that CISA example, and so, these 16 industries have been deemed as essential, and you can see for obvious reasons. Water, sewer, gas, electrical. If these are not essential, well, what are the repercussions of that? Number 9 and number 10, roads, highways, public transportation. How do folks get to the grocery store, so that they can provide those life essential functions? The internet, telecom. If we can't communicate in these times, what do we do? Financial institutions, such as banks. These are super important. So, these are all deemed as essential, but also important to note that, if you're supporting the supply chain of these essential functions, we would consider you to be in this bucket. And so, roads and highways, it's one thing to maintain them, but the sort of materials that are required to kind of keep these roads paved and, is critical as well. So folks that are in the aggregation business, as an example. Water and sewer, if you're producing, pipes or anything that would go into sort of that process. Those are examples of supply chains that support critical infrastructure, and so those are deemed essential as well.
Yeah, my mind goes to some pretty clear examples, right? One of our largest manufacturers in Buncombe County is Eaton Electric, manufacturing power generation equipment, clearly in support of the national electrical grid. EVL Technologies, another homegrown manufacturer of satellite systems, clearly very important to our defense and national security. So those two would see themselves very clearly in this guidance. And to be clear, would not require any written permission from the county. They see themselves in this guidance. They and their valuable employees and staff should feel confident they're essential and business operations should continue.
Absolutely, and that's a critical point, Clark, because that's probably the number one question we get. One, am I essential? We'll check the guidance first before you ask. 2, what do I need to do to prove that I'm essential? And so there is no requirement for a business to have any documentation that deems them essential. And further, there's no requirement for those traveling to your business as employees to carry sort of, a passport or something as they're driving highways and roads to get to work.
Thanks for adding that. In the interest of time, let's move on to some additional supplemental guidance you gave specifically to our manufacturing community, where you went ahead and dove a little bit deeper into that definition of essential manufacturing.
That's right, and so you can see these on the screen. These are considered to, again, be essential business functions: food and beverage processing, pharmaceuticals, sanitary products, telecom, more important than ever. And so agriculture, a great example. How do we keep our food supply sustained? So, these are essential business functions. Again, if you're suppliers to these essential business functions, again, would be deemed essential.
Thanks, Tim. Moving on to another really big umbrella, and close to 15% of our workforce locally is in retail. This is a pretty big bucket. Could you help us understand a definition for essential retail employment?
Absolutely, and these essential retail stores, you really have to think about them as kind of life essential. So the one that is easiest to explain to folks is grocery stores. If we shut down our retail grocery stores, what would happen? That would be really challenging. Additionally, laundromats. We need to make sure that we're maintaining proper sanitation, especially, for those that are going to essential workplaces every day. Gas stations, auto repair. These are the types of functions that allow, our community to continue to move forward. But, with that, I'd also say, not all retail is essential. And there are certain, we'll call them nice to haves, if you will, quality of life type services that are retail in nature. Those are not essential. And, we need folks to realize that, this is a temporary stay home, stay safe order, and to, refrain from doing non-essential type retail. And, for instance, a shoe store may not be considered essential. A jewelry store may not be considered essential. And we know that's tough for folks, but I think if you think about it from a life safety, life essentials point of view, I think you'll be able to make those determinations for yourself.
Thanks, Tim. I know the county doesn't discount the great challenge that this will present to businesses who are considered non-essential. For those, I would point them to a number of resources available on our website, ashevillechamber.org/coronavirus. where we talk about employment-related support systems, where we talk about our second town hall, financial resources available for business during this downturn, and just yesterday releasing a town hall on public policy. There's fast-changing support coming from our state and federal governments, lots of places for our business to turn should they find themselves in this shutdown for the next 2 weeks. Let me pivot for a moment to talk about minimum basic operations. I think this was a really thoughtful addition for businesses who need to maintain critical staffing. Even though they may not be deemed essential, they can maintain staffing for certain purposes. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. We tried to be reasonable with the policy, and so this is an example of that, I think. So earlier I said we can't expect a business to just shut down overnight, come back in 2 weeks, and expect that nothing's changed. If your business requires somebody to go to your office, for instance, to run payroll because you can't do it remotely, or if you're in a business where your inventory is perishable and you need someone to periodically check on your inventory, or if your equipment needs to run every 24 to 48 hours just to ensure that the line doesn't fall apart. These are the types of things that we think are reasonable, and even if you are not deemed essential, would be sort of exceptions to the policy. With that said, I have to stress, we're not trying to create a giant loophole where your entire workforce deems themselves as minimum basic operations. Not the intent. We're asking that you get to the minimum basic operation so that you can comply with the stay home, stay safe order. And as with any of the essential or not essential functions we talked about today, you must comply with social distancing requirements.
Tim, all across Western North Carolina, for the past 2 weeks, I have been talking to manufacturers and service providers that are adapting in really creative and resilient ways to rise to the challenges presented by the COVID-19 crisis. Our manufacturing community especially is being called on to meet significant lacking inventories in, for example, personal protective gear or ventilators, and the list goes on and on and on. Thank you for including this particular carve out for those manufacturers that are seeking to help our community and our nation through this time. Any additional clarification you'd like to offer here?
I just want to commend those in our community, in the manufacturing business, hotel industry, all those that are chipping in to try to respond to this. And so, if you're retooling your business so that you can support PPE, we commend you, we thank you, and you are exempt from the stay home, stay safe order. A big need for us as well as PPE is, hand sanitizer and disinfectants. So those that are able, we appreciate it, and you're considered an essential business. Thank you.
Let's pivot to another large and important part of our economy, of course, which is hospitality and tourism that has taken such a large upfront hit, particularly in employment for that first week of the crisis. I think you've spoken one-on-one with many in our lodging community. Can you share that guidance with them here again today?
Absolutely. The simple way to look at this is hotels, other types of lodging, Airbnbs, considered to be essential with a very strong caveat. If you are housing essential folks that are associated with essential businesses. Additionally, if you already had someone who was at your property, residing in it, they are allowed to continue to stay. The key here, though, just to be as clear as I possibly can, leisure travel, leisure accommodations are not deemed essential. And we know that is extremely challenging, but this is a public health crisis and we're responding as such. What we do know is that within our own local community, much of our cases has resulted from those traveling from out of state, from areas that have community spread. And so at this important time in this data-driven analysis, we have to ensure that we're not bringing additional folks to our community that are going to further spread COVID-19. So, in as plain speak as I can possibly say, we've spoken with the industry. They understand where we're coming from. Leisure travel is not considered essential. And further, we've asked the industry to screen on the front end to make very clear to those coming to this community that the only way they can stay is if they're supporting essential business. And if they are not, then they must isolate and quarantine.
So Tim, a few examples come to mind, right? Business travel for essential business, airline teams, emergency response teams. What are we asking of our frontline staff in lodging to make those determinations?
Yep. The industry has been working together legally to determine how they can properly screen, and some guidance has been shared amongst those leaders. But with that, and similar to what has occurred at the airport, just making clear that folks from areas of community spread, and the three big ones that we think about, are Washington State, New York as examples. But there's more. Community spread isn't just limited to those three states. There's more coming all the time. So if you are from one of those locations, you are required to quarantine for 14 days. There is no exception. You must quarantine, and quarantine is very different than what we're talking about today, where we're saying you can leave your quarters to go perform essential functions. A quarantine means that you're wherever you are and not going outside for any purpose for that 14-day period to limit the spread. So this is a very strong response, but it's because it's important. So the different industries, they have guidance on that they've shared amongst themselves. They're posting at their doors information for those that would be staying with them, and further have been providing documentations to any guests that would be staying with them. Again, only for essential purposes.
Thanks, Tim. I think there's lots of misunderstanding, which is to be expected in such fast-changing circumstances. So I thought we'd take a moment just to reiterate a few basics with the audience. One, the county requires no written permission. There's no certification, no licensing required to be considered essential. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Just as importantly, we've heard from a lot of concerned employers that their workforce, their staff, their employees are concerned about being caught out in public. Could you just sort of help them understand there's no requirement on the individual to travel to work or to other essential functions?
That's correct. There's no requirement to carry any documentation. If you get pulled over for some reason, it's probably because of a traffic violation, not because someone is proactively checking on your essential status.
Great. And finally, the third bullet there is just a reminder that we are adhering to and following this policy for one very important reason, which is limiting community spread of this virus. Do you want to hit some high points on social distancing and sanitation guidelines that any continuing to operate business must adhere to?
Glad to. And cannot stress this enough. Essential, not essential, critical operations, infrastructure, whatever. You are never going to be exempt from the social distancing requirements. This is the number one requirement, and this goes for every single business, every individual in our community. Social distancing involves staying 6 feet apart from one another and making sure that we're not within each other's presence for greater than 10 minutes at a time. The way COVID-19 spreads is when people do not adhere to social distancing. And so as an essential or not essential function, you must ensure that you're maintaining those policies. Additionally, sanitation, hygiene, disinfecting is more important than ever. So I've talked to many employers who have put in place practices that are significantly more stringent than they were before, and that's great. That's exactly what we need. Areas of great touch, tables, doorknobs, machine screens, iPad screens. These are all areas that are ripe for passing along COVID-19, and so we ask that everyone take the appropriate action. If you're not sure what the appropriate action is, or if you're not sure what an accepted disinfectant is, feel free to reach out to us at any time through our buncombecounty.org website. ready@buncombecounty.org is a great way to route that question. But it is of supreme importance that we maintain social distancing, appropriate sanitation in this time.
And we've heard a lot of creative solutions from business this last 2 weeks on how they're adhering to social distancing in non-traditional ways. For example, balancing workforce across shifts, assigning workforce to use different entrances and exits in a business, assigning them to use different bathrooms, anything they can do to help maintain that separation at the workplace. So please continue to share those best practices amongst yourselves as businesses here in Western North Carolina. We all know there are going to be some people that maybe fall into a gray area, Tim, or fall into an area that's considered non-essential. What guidance would you give those companies?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, if you read the guidance and the interpretive guidance and you feel that you are essential, you do not need to email us. You don't need to call me. You can proceed as normal. If you're unclear where you fit, please email us at business@buncombecounty.org and provide the information on the screen. We've got folks, a team of folks that's reviewing all the emails that come into that inbox, and we'll reply back to you as soon as possible. I will say that of the 800 or so emails that we received in the first couple hours of this inbox being open, the majority of the requests we received were for essential businesses that wanted to confirm that they're essential. And while I appreciate that, you following up on it, it's more important for us to focus on those other requests to help folks that are in the gray area and not be overwhelmed with those that are clearly in the black or white area. So.
Thank you for the time and staffing that you're putting into answering those questions, Tim.
Absolutely.
On the screen now are just two important websites that I would encourage our audience to continue to visit. One, the Buncombe County site, a source of late breaking news, hour-to-hour public health updates and policies relating to business and personal and community life. The second, found on the Asheville Chamber website, a guide for business resources during the public health crisis of COVID-19. Tim, while we leave those up, any last minute thoughts you would share with the audience?
The big thing is these are challenging times. Things are moving quickly. Folks are sharing information amongst themselves. It's of course important to communicate, but we have to make sure that we're communicating accurate information. And so you're doing yourself a disservice if you're communicating inaccurate information. So please, for any questions locally about the status of coronavirus, the best way to disinfect, et cetera, please refer to the Buncombe County website. If you're not satisfied with that, let us know. We're glad to provide additional information. If you're looking for information at the state level, that's going to be our North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. If you're looking for it at the federal level, that's going to be the CDC, Center for Disease Control. So these are very specific resources we want to make sure people are referencing so that we prevent misinformation and ultimately stay safe. So.
Thanks, Tim. I think that the business community of this region understands that it will take cooperation, collaboration, and certainly creativity to see us through this time. I'm grateful for your efforts to join us here today and for the efforts of the public health officials at the county who are working around the clock. Thanks so much for being here, and thanks to all of our audience who's joined us for this town hall put on by the Asheville Area Chamber and the Economic Development Coalition for Asheville and Buncombe County. Be safe.